Hey guys, Ark here, bringing to you Chapter 1, Episode 8 of my Learning Night Elf series. So on this episode, we're kind of getting out of the basics, the build layout, build order. I still want to concentrate on a couple topics before we get into truly playing and playing the game and getting involved with that. So Chapter 1, again to reiterate some from previous episodes, these are all topics that I feel should be known well in advance. You should know this immediately going into the game. This should be ingrained in your mind before you even play the game of how your build is going to look like, what build order you're going to do, how your base is going to look like. Now, you might not know exactly what build order you're going to do until you start the game, but you should already know if you're going to choose to go hunts, if you're going to choose to go archers, this is what you do. If you're going to if you're going to play against an orc, this is how your base looks like. Similarly, your early game is very important. So Ancient of War creeping is one of the biggest game mechanics that was introduced for Night Elf that essentially revolutionized how the Night Elf plays early game. That is why, in my opinion, if you're going to go an Archer opening or anything that can utilize Ancient of War creeping, if you're not doing Ancient of War creeping, you're already starting the game off from behind. So that is why I consider this a basic, and it should be almost a prerequisite that you know exactly how you're going to Ancient of War creep depending on what map you get. So I would highly suggest taking this video and reviewing it and trying to apply this in custom games until you can basically do it without even thinking. So with that said, I'm going to just jump right into the game and kind of walk through the process. So build orders and everything, kind of throw that out the window. I'm not really going to cover that. You can watch previous videos for kind of reviewing that information. So on this map in particular, the orange camp is where we're going to really be creeping. At the end of this video, I'll kind of run through some general maps. Actually, I'm sorry. Let's doing this on the fly a little bit. Sometimes I make mistakes. I already missed one thing I wanted to talk about, so we'll just restart it. So jump into the game. We're on the other side of the map this time. So we'll build our altar. We're going to build our moonwell, but keep in mind where this wisp is at. So when this wisp gets to the G, right around here is where I'm going to take a wisp out of my gold mine and send that to the camp I want an Ancient of War creep. The reason why this works is this is just a timing trick that I use to kind of tell me exactly when to start building the AOW. And it works on pretty much every map that you're going to... It's basically a perfect timing on every map for when you need to build the AOW. Other methods you can use is you can look at your gold. And once you hit a certain gold threshold, that's when you take the wisp out. Personally, I just like doing it based off the wisp timing. That's just what I learned initially, way back in the day. So again, Ancient of War creeping is, in my opinion, is almost a prerequisite for Night Elf play style in the early game. There are some more advanced mechanics and everything that, as you get into a higher skill level, you'll start to pick up. And we'll cover that in later chapters. But for this, I only really consider the act of Ancient of War creeping the prerequisite. So you might not be able to handle harassment or anything while you're AOW creeping. That'll come in time. But the real trick is that just trying to AOW creep is really the best thing you can do to kind of tell you where your gaps are and what you need to work on and improve. So my Ancient of War just finished, so I'm building an archer. If you remember Chapter 1, Episode 1 of the video, this is where the build layout that I'm following is coming from. So you can kind of just pay attention to my Demon Hunter, my Archer, the build time. So my Archer is definitely going to finish first. See, it's about to pop out. So when this pops out, I'm going to aggro the creeps by attacking it, running it back, and as I'm running back, I lift up my Ancient of War. That will force the creeps, this range creep in particular, to come closer to my Ancient of War. And as these creeps are being attacked, I'm going to slowly walk my AOW back and try not to miss any attacks. So right here is where I'm going to switch my Ancient of War attack to go to the other creep so that I can finish this off with my hero. I'll show you in a second why that's so important. So one mechanic in Warcraft 3 is that if a building were to, so I'm going to stop this, watch my experience. My Archer just got the kill, so we'll do it on this creep actually. So in Warcraft 3, if a building were to get the kill, you don't get experience. So let's watch my Demon Hunter as this Ancient of War kills this. So my experience stayed at 140. The Ancient of War is a building, and so when it gets the kill on a unit, you don't get experience on your hero. That's consistent with towers, that's consistent with ancients, that's consistent with any building that can do damage. Oftentimes you might see a player that's running around his tree of life. When it gets close to the last hit, they might start building a wisp so that the tree of life can't attack anymore. That's kind of the idea behind why they do that. And it works the same way for Ancient of War creeping. So the only time you want to kill the creep is when your hero is out. So that's the first step. You don't want to kill it before your hero is out because then you don't have any way to gain experience. Second thing is you don't want the Ancient of War to kill the creep itself because then you don't get any value from it. You still get the item, but you don't get the experience out of it, and that's one of the biggest things. So that's essentially Ancient of War creeping. It works on almost every map. I can't think of one on the ladder map that it doesn't work on. I'm sure it works on 2v2 maps. There's probably every map in the ladder you can utilize this on. All right, guys, we're going to jump right into the maps. I am going to do a little voiceover over it. So we're going to start with Concealed Hill. So the most logical spot for AOW creeping is these two reds. So if you creep this camp right here and then immediately go to the turtles right here, that's a quick level 2. So this is really the most logical and really the only place that you can AOW creep at the start. So let's jump into Terrain of Stand. So Terrain of Stand gives you a little bit more options. So let's assume we spawn down in the bottom right here. Depending on the matchup, I will often do one of these three. In Elfmere or against Human, for example, I'll typically creep the Merc camp. And this is actually the old version of Terrain of Stand ladder that they used to have. The Merc camp is now currently right here, and this camp here is now right here. So keep that in mind. So this is for creeping the Merc camp. This would be creeping the item shop, and this is creeping the gold mine. The gold mine I typically only do against undead. This one right here would be more versus orc, and this is against elf and human typically. So Twisted Meadows, there's really only two spots that are often crept. One is the Merc camp, the other is this orange camp right here. The orange camp I would say is safer typically, but if you spawn in the bottom right or the top left, the Merc camp can be safe depending on the matchup. I often don't go for the Merc camp just because I feel like it's a little bit riskier, but the orange camp is definitely another option too. This is a difficult map, especially for newer players, because the real options to AOW creep are fairly difficult, so keep that in mind. It will take some practice if you try and do it on this map. Echo Isles, again, that was one of the games we covered. So the most common spot I'd say is this camp right up at the top. There is often a spot, actually on both sides, so this is the old version of Echo Isles. There is now a spot to put your AOW right here. And this is to creep the Merc camp. This is a relatively riskier creep path, and you do need to use some creep mechanics to actually creep this effectively. So I would highly recommend starting with this camp up here, and then maybe as your skill level improves, you can look at trying to utilize some of the advanced creeping mechanics to creep this one effectively. I will make another video on Ancient of War creeping in the future to cover some of the more advanced creep mechanics and such like that. So on this one, Northern Isles, so typically the most common spot is this orange camp right up here. It's a really strong camp. There is another, you could also AOW creep this if you're not very confident on creeping this one up here, but I would typically always go for this camp up here. Amazonia gives you a little bit more flexibility too. It's kind of like Terrain of Stand in that you can creep the shop, but your spawn positions make it a little bit more riskier without any real benefit. Because your item shop, it's going to still give you the same item that Terrain of Stand gives you, which is basically just a weak consumable item. So I personally don't really care much for AOW creeping this, but it's definitely an option. I put 2 boxes down here just because you can place your AOW in 2 different spots. If you place it right here, it's a little bit easier to creep both of these right away. If you place it right here, you have to creep this one, and then as you're creeping this one, slowly walk your tree over here to make it effective. I personally prefer placing it here in most matchups just because an early scout can cancel your AOW if you try to place it here, and it's difficult to prevent that. So that's why I prefer to place it in this box here. And that was actually the last one. So this is going to end the episode. There are other maps I didn't really cover, but if you have any specific questions, feel free to let me know. I would highly recommend practicing this in custom games against computers until you really get the hang of it and you can do it really without thinking. So have a good day, everyone. Bye.